Hello everyone, welcome back to Undoctrinate Yourself. Today is my fourth time recording with Dr. Jack Kruse. If you don't know him, he's an esteemed, recently retired neurosurgeon and expert in quantum and circadian and light biology. The episodes on this podcast that you can check out with him that we previously recorded include episodes number 13, 24, and 31. I also included and released a podcast on my Patreon with Jack when I was visiting him down in El Salvador, but it is not available on Spotify or YouTube due to some sensitive topics. But having said that, today's episode is also a doozy, and it is being recorded after the return of Jack from his trip to Suriname and South America, as well as Antarctica. He was traveling for almost 60 days straight. And just for some context, I have pinned a talk that Jack gave while he was in Suriname on national TV. He gave this talk and it's being pinned to the beginning of this episode. So after I'm done giving my spiel here, we're going to go directly into that talk, which he gave at a conference that was focused on the topic of corruption in government. And during this talk, he was unceremoniously removed from the stage. Essentially, he was censored by the person in charge of this party called NPS down there. And so that is teeing up what we will then talk about throughout the episode, which dives even more into corruption in government, corruption in money, corruption in medicine, and how they're all inextricably tied together. So I hope you enjoy this episode. And again, we're going to be going directly into that talk. And then after that talk, which is roughly 20-25 minutes, we're going to get into the podcast, which is about 2.5 hours. So enjoy.
I've been in your country for 10 days. I've talked to 500 people. One of those people happened to be Samuel, who you just heard from. He's a politician. I am not a politician. I'm a neurosurgeon. I'm a doctor. I come from the most corrupt country in the world, the United States. Samuel comes from probably one of the least corrupt countries. But that's where the story begins for us. How did Samuel's presentation and my presentation fit together? The key with a country in turmoil that's struggling with corruption is that you have to come together and have values of what will be inside your constitution and how you choose to live together. So I'm going to tell you a little story about how I got involved in politics in the last 2 years. Most of you know, you've lived through the same thing that I've lived through in the United States. The corruption for me as a neurosurgeon in healthcare was my government spent money, sent information places like Ukraine, Wuhan, and they created a virus. And that virus was bad enough because it broke our laws. It broke our constitution. Our government broke its peace with its people. But then they did something more nefarious. They hid the truth. And they didn't tell anybody really what they wanted to do. And then it got even worse. They made deals with corporations. Many of the corporations that you people have dealt with in the past, oil, gold, where they took advantage of the people, and the government helped them do this. So you can imagine, I was not very happy that my job was taken apart. 4 years ago, in the beginning of COVID, my whole practice stopped. I could not operate. They took my operating machines away. They took my anesthesia machines away. They said, you have to do this for the good. I said, show me the data. Here's the problem. I'm that guy that is really good at looking for bullshit. And there was a lot of bullshit from the politicians. So what did I do? I was fortunate that I have two very, very powerful patients. One of them you may know, one of them you may not. First powerful patient is the biggest music producer in the world named Rick Rubin. He does Metallica, Adele, AC/DC. Why is that important for you to hear? Because he's so powerful in the Western world that if you go on his podcast, they can't cancel him. The politicians cannot put a muzzle in him. And what was the second one? A social media platform that I know is not used very much in Suriname yet, but I'm hoping to change that. You guys like to use Facebook. We don't like Facebook in the United States. Why? Because it's part of the corruption that makes up the United States. So Twitter used to have a CEO named Jack Dorsey. Jack Dorsey is very, very famous because he embraced decentralization on the finance part of his life. But what happened? Corruption came to his company because people from Silicon Valley populated his board. This is very similar to what happens in your parliamentary system. So even though the leader is a good person, if the board is corrupt, that means the policies that are made are also corrupt. So what did Jack Dorsey decide to do? Samuel just gave you the answer. Samuel told you that politicians or CEOs have to give the power back to the people. So what did Jack Dorsey do? He did the unthinkable. Remember, he's a billionaire. $9 billion in Bitcoin. What did he do? He called up Elon Musk. He called up an immigrant from South Africa. And he told him what the problem was. And he told him, I want to sell you my company so that you can get out from under the corruption of my board. Why was that important for the story I'm here to tell you? As soon as I heard that, I started to go after my own government on social media. On X, I am very controversial. On Twitter, very controversial. When Dr. Fauci told you to stay out of the sun, I told you to go in the sun. When he told you to social distance, I told you to kiss your wife if she has COVID, because that's the best way to take care of it, not with a vaccine from Pfizer. Everything they told us, because of the research I did, was a lie. But I started to talk about this in 2020. You guys know right now it's 2025. So you also probably know that if a doctor speaks up and says these things, immediately they either try to shut you up, take your job away, or kill you. And that's happened in the United States because the most powerful corporations in the United States are Big Pharma and the banking industry. They're tied together. For those of you who don't know, Big Pharma was formed from the Rockefeller Family Foundation in 1911 when they broke up Standard Oil. Big Pharma came from that breakup, for those of you who don't know. So I started to post these things, and what magically started to happen? When the World Health Organization put out all the recommendations that I know everybody here in Suriname had to deal with, many politicians, they throw their hands up. I'm not a doctor. I don't know. He says this, he's an expert, let's go with that. So what happens? They turn around to their people and say, well, these guys are the experts, we're just the politicians, you follow it. Nobody questioned the answer. That was part of the plan of Big Pharma and government. So magically, in 2019, a 36-year-old gentleman who also was part of the most corrupt government in Central America, named Nayib Bukele. He first was in one party, then went in another party, and what did the two parties tell him? After being the mayor of the capital city, they said, you give too much power back to the people, we don't want you in the political process. So what did he do? He looked to his constitution. And his constitution said that if you go and get 100,000 signatures one day before the election, you can form your own new party. So he went to the streets, and guess what the people did? They did exactly what Samuel told you. Direct democracy started the newest party in El Salvador. Do you know what the name of that party is called? Something Samuel told you a little while ago. It's called New Ideas. The ideas that Nayib Bukele brought may shock some of you. The first thing he did, he said, my country uses American money. American money is the global reserve currency. It is the most corrupt money on the planet. And we all know that. For you, if you don't know that, in our Continental Congress in the 1770s, Thomas Jefferson fought with Alexander Hamilton. And because there was no monetary technology back then, who did we adopt? We adopted the colonial system of the Bank of England. So guess what? The United States and Suriname have something in common. We're also the product of colonialism. But the difference between us and probably you is we got really mad at the king and we shot at him. And we took our rights back. And then we decided collectively as a group in Philadelphia, how do we want to organize our government? And it turned out in our genesis, what was our problem? We wanted to worship God without the government intervening. And we also didn't want to pay tax on tea. If you can believe that, 250 years later, that is the reason we shot at the king. Today in the United States, we've been so dumbed down by political ideology that we let our government inject us with a bioweapon to get rid of us. Why? Because we have $37 trillion in debt, and it's much better to get rid of the debt if you kill the people. That's the truth. Now, I'm not going to tell you that you're going to like this truth. Why? Because when the United States gets sick, everybody gets sick, because you follow us. So what was my message as a doctor? I went on Twitter, and I was mad as hell. And I opened my mouth like a dragon and breathed everywhere and told everybody what was happening. Magically, Nayib Bukele starts to see my tweets on Twitter. And he says to me, go find that doctor and find out why he's able to say the things that he says. He was shocked to find out in 2020, I left the corrupt United States, and guess where I moved? I moved to El Salvador. He didn't even know I was in this country. You know why I moved to El Salvador? Anyone? He's the first president in the history of the world that ever instituted decentralized money to his constitution. He asked a 26-year-old gentleman from Chicago, whose father worked on Wall Street in Chicago, in the Chicago Board of Trade. He said, I want to have money that's fair for everybody, not just fair for the people that have it. So he invited Jack Mallers down. What did Jack Mallers do? He wrote a constitutional amendment for El Salvador. Took him 3 days to put that in. When I saw that in the United States, I immediately knew what Samuel just told you. Anytime a politician returns power back to the people, especially when it's tied to money, this is no politician to joke with. He is speaking truth. So I decided to take my family, my wife, down to El Salvador before the law was changed. Why? Because I'm a Bitcoiner. I was a Bitcoiner before this. I became a Bitcoiner in 2013 because I knew Bitcoin was the way to fix corruption in the United States. So when I went down there, 2 weeks later, Nayib Bukele passed a law to make Bitcoin legal tender. Immediately, I called a moving company. I sold everything in the United States. I picked everything up and moved to El Salvador. Why? The idea in the United States in our founding documents is fabulous. Our constitutional republic, the way it's put together, is beautiful. But we've made a lot of mistakes in how we've allowed the government to ruin that document. And this is our own fault. I'll be the first one to tell you that. And I think Samuel has done a good job laying out his side. But just remember something, even in the richest country in the world, you can have tremendous corruption. And we do. And for those of you paying attention to what's going on in the United States right now, Elon Musk hired a bunch of 20-year-olds to go in and find out where all our money went. And in the last 2 weeks, America, their eyes are wide open. Now we know how bad the politicians were. I knew how bad they were. That's why when Biden and Kamala Harris were in, I picked up and left. You cannot live in a place where the corruption is this bad. And when your money is corrupt, to answer the gentleman's question who asked it before, everything else will be corrupt. I don't care what else you said. Every part of the government needs to be fixed. But when you fix the money, you can fix many of those problems. In my opinion, that's where it begins. So, President Bukele invited me to his basement, and I told him the story of the United States in a very quick way. I said, we have two problems in our Constitution. The first one is legal tender status. We took gold away from our money. You heard Samuel tell you the reason why Switzerland was successful. In 1971, when he let women vote, Richard Nixon took gold away from our money. Immediately our money began to devalue and inflate. You have the same problem right now in Suriname. The United States did this on purpose. Why? Because the United States likes to fight wars everywhere. You need to have corruptible money to do that. This is part of our problem. The second part is, what's the other angle of attack in our Constitution that had no protection? COVID, medical tyranny. There was a man who signed our Declaration of Independence. His name is Benjamin Rush. He was a doctor like me from Chicago. He warned Thomas Jefferson. He warned James Madison. He warned all the people in Philadelphia that were fighting about how they were going to organize this new government against the king. And he said, we need to put a constitutional amendment in to protect us. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison and John Adams went back 5,000 years in human history. Guess what? They never found one event where medical tyranny was used. So what did Thomas Jefferson say? We're not going to put it in the Constitution. But I want everybody in Suriname to know something. Somebody in 1773 and 1774 predicted Dr. Anthony Fauci, who shows up in 1982. And in 1982, the first bout of medical tyranny actually happens. This is HIV. Bad problems in the United States from that. We recover from that in medicine. We don't make a lot of good mistakes. We keep the same corrupt doctor in power, and then what do? We pay that doctor more than the President of the United States. Do you know why? Because after they knocked down the Twin Towers in New York City, they had to pass a Patriot Act. So if you do gain-of-function research, you have to do it not in the United States. It has to be done in a foreign place, or you get hung. And they didn't know that. So they moved it to Wuhan. They moved it to Ukraine. If you want to know the reason why the war is going on in Ukraine, I just told you. Okay? And that war started a long time ago. So I want you to know just how corrupt my country is. They put the whole world through this. And you might see that I'm pretty pissed off about this, because I am. You will not fix corruption until you get serious about the root cause. And the root cause is the money. If you do not fix the money, you will fix nothing. The second thing you need to do is the lesson I bring to you from Nayib Bukele. Look at your foundational documents. See where the holes are. Fix the holes. The single most important part of your Constitution is the preamble. What is that? That's the beginning of the Constitution. Why? It unites you as a people. So 10 days ago, I didn't know too much about the history of the Dutch and why you have the biggest melting pot of a country I've ever seen. But I learned. And one of my friends that I met through a conference in El Salvador called Adopting Bitcoin was Maya Parabo. And she told me a little bit of her own history about corruption. Then she set me up with those two gentlemen back there. You see them, they wear orange. They're tour guides. They took me all over your country, all in your city, and they showed me the cockroach room. They showed me what happened in 1982. They showed me what happened in 1987. They told me about the history so I could understand. I asked them, why is so many Cuban people coming in now? Why do you have Maroons? Why do you have these people, that people? Why? Because the Dutch were just like the United States. They were corrupt. They couldn't run this country, so they brought people in to do their work for them. They corrupted people because the money was also corrupted. And all of you are here today because you decided to stay. So today, I went to the Amazon River Basin and I made a little video, and I hope to share this with you to see if in my 10 days as a doctor, did I make the correct diagnosis about Suriname or not? And if you think I did, then I'm going to read something to you that I wrote for you to start this constitutional description. Why? I wrote the preamble for your Constitution today on the road back. And if you would like me to read it to you, I will. Learning more about Suriname, this is the reason I came. I spent 10 days here. I met Maya in El Salvador at a Bitcoin conference, and we had a 2-hour discussion about what she's attempting to do here. And Maya and I bonded over something that
you had it going.
Recording. So, can you explain who you are and what you're doing?
Well, hello, everybody in Suriname. My name is Dr. Jack Kruse. I'm a neurosurgeon, brain surgeon in the United States. I'm also a big Bitcoiner. I'm very interested in learning more about Suriname. This is the reason I came. I spent 10 days here. I met Maya in El Salvador at a Bitcoin conference, and we had a 2-hour discussion about what she's attempting to do here. And Maya and I bonded over something that you would probably not expect. I believe in decentralized ideas. What does that mean when you don't understand it? People in Suriname understand centralization. The Dutch are the main controller. They came and they brought all different groups of immigrants here, and I don't have to recapitulate that history with you. You know that. This is not the type of organization that humans have. Interestingly, right down here in the Amazon rainforest, we have people who integrated in with the trees, the bugs, the insects, the bacteria in the ground, the mushrooms, over 4 billion years. And then the humans came much later, 10,000, 15,000 years, and they shared the wisdom together. This is the essence of decentralization. So you may not know this. Decentralization in natural way is nature. Suriname has this already built into the fabric of the people that are here. Those are the people that live in the south part of the country. They have been decentralized from the Well, I'm told that we have to stop, so sorry I can't show you the video. And if you want to read what I wrote for you, maybe just come up and talk to me at the end, because I'll stick around. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Undoctrinate Yourself. Today is my 4th time recording with Dr. Jack Kruse, aka Uncle Jack. Today's a special day for multiple reasons. It's Valentine's Day. And actually, last time we recorded, it was not necessarily a holiday, but it was on 9/11. So we have an interesting pattern going on here of recording on important days. But also an important day because you just arrived home yesterday from your trip to Suriname, but you were gone, like we were just mentioning, almost 2 months. You had also done a trip to Antarctica, so we want to hear all about that. But as listeners will have heard, we just attached a video of your talk that you gave on live national TV in Suriname, and the kind of drama that ensued after. So maybe we should start the story around there.
Yeah, I think the issue that I think everybody needs to know about, because there's a lot of different parts of this story that I think are important, that need ironing out. I also think it needs a lot of truth serum, because if your true ethos is decentralized health and decentralized finance, then the truth needs to be associated with this. And I don't think this whole story has really had a lot of truth associated with it.
Yeah.
And this is the reason. I think this podcast will be very, very important, not only for people interested in health for a different reason of what I found in the Amazon basin, but I also think for Bitcoiners, it's going to be really important because the way in which you take on a task actually has big implications. When you're not completely truthful, even when you're not truthful for good reason, it can lead to really, really bad problems, with your reputation, with your future interactions, when you meet people at future meetings. And I know no is what I'm talking about, but we'll get right into it. So the trip for me began on December 21st, 2024. My lawyer down here got engaged. We had a big party. And at that party, I sat there and I was like, well, none of my family are coming for Christmas. No one's coming to visit me. How about I go knock something off my bucket list? So I looked out there and I said, I've not been to one continent. That's Antarctica. And I saw that there was an opportunity. Because anybody who knows anything about Antarctica, if you have to go across Drake's Passage, which is kind of one of the most harrowing things you can do in your life, you only have about a 6 to 8 week window to do it, in the summertime in the Southern Hemisphere. So here I am on the shortest day of the year. I got on a 2-hour flight and went to the longest day of the year in the Southern Hemisphere, which I have to tell you was interesting. Why? Because I actually gained an extra 3 hours of sunlight from a 2-hour trip, which was really, really interesting. I've never traveled, from northern to southern hemisphere on a solstice day like this. So that's kind of how the trip began. But that's also how the story of Suriname began, because when I tweeted out that little fact, someone down in Suriname who was interested in the political scene down there made a comment, well, how can you come to South America, and not come and see me, down here? And that happened like almost 2 months ago. So I mentioned that to Chantel, and she goes, no, we really do need, to go there. So what was the journey all about? I flew from El Salvador to Bogota, Bogota to Lima, got on a cruise ship, went all the way around South America, got to Ushuaia, the bottom of the world, and then I spent 5 days in Antarctica. The weather was so bad coming across, back across Drake's Passage. Going down, it wasn't too bad, but there was a lot of people that were sick on the boat, trust me. But when we came back, there was such a huge storm that we missed the Falkland Islands coming back because there was 30-foot waves. Wow. And you can only imagine what that would be like, going through, the worst of times with a group of people that are already yakking. So eventually we go to Uruguay, see some of my members there, and actually wind up in Buenos Aires and see more members down there. And I spent 5 days in Buenos Aires. Why? I was scheduled to meet with some of the people who work with Malay, especially about the central banking and things like that. And you guys probably all know that this was, before all the stuff started happening really with Elon and Trump and everything else. So there was a big buzz down there while this is going on. So we fly back to El Salvador. I'm home for maybe 2 days. My son actually flew in from the States to meet us for Christmas because he couldn't believe, because he didn't come, that I decided to go to Antarctica. So he was really pissed about that. And then when I was home, I noticed that there was another cruise going on the top part of South America that actually would get me within 1,000 miles of Suriname. So I did the unthinkable again, and I booked a cruise with 1 day notice, got on a Copa flight and flew to Panama, get on the cruise, and it took us through the Panama Canal. We got to see Colombia, Venezuela, and eventually wound up in Aruba. And from Aruba, I took Suriname Airways and flew another 1,000 miles directly east to the capital city of Suriname. And I will tell you that flight was probably a flight that kicked my ass pretty good.
Really?
Uh, yeah, it was gnarly because it was late at night, and then when we arrived in the capital there, it's not like an airport you ever seen. It's like an airport that you probably would have seen in the 1920s or 30s, where you land on a big tarmac,
Yeah.
you come downstairs, and you have to walk into this huge building.
Whoa.
That's really not even, a terminal. It almost looks like an airplane hangar.
Yeah.
And on the top, it says, "Welcome to Suriname, the largest forest in the world."
Whoa.
That was the welcome at about 1 o'clock in the morning. Then it took us almost an hour and a half to get to the capital city, which I didn't realize was going to be that big a deal. So I was absolutely shut. I was,
Whoa.
and we checked in, and that's where the journey started to find out what was going on. Now, why did I do all of this? Part of the story that I haven't really talked a lot about was what happened after all the things I learned about polio, after all the things I started to learn about Sarah Stewart, Mary Sherman, linked to the JFK assassination and all that. One of the key things about SV40 that was found in Sarah Stewart's thesis. Most of you probably will need to go back and rewatch parts of the Danny Jones original podcast when I get into this. Sarah Stewart and Mary Sherman are both medical school classmates from 1936, University of Chicago. Mary Sherman became an expert in electromagnetic radiation, treatment of cancers, but Sarah Stewart was probably the true misfit, the true decentralized savage. She's the first woman in the history of the world that linked cancer with viruses. And she had a thesis. That thesis was owned by the federal government, United States. And these two women honed their skills at the University of Chicago in their early careers. I like to call both of them the Biologic Manhattan Project because very similar to what happened with General Groves, these two women were doing things that no one at the time in science knew about because it was unpublished, but two, their ideas were so much on the fringe of science to think in the 1940s and 50s what they were coming up with. This is a DNA time in biology. No one understood anything, but the observations specifically that Sarah Stewart made were really, really important. So you may be saying, Jack, if this is all unpublished and this, that, and the other thing, how did you come upon all this information? Well, it turns out part of the story that I haven't told anybody is in the basement of Charity Hospital, which is the oldest hospital prior to Katrina. There was boxes related to MK Ultra. And we also, Tulane University and LSU share Charity Hospital where we do our residency.
Mm-hmm.
Tulane University also is a very unusual place to have associated with their School of Medicine, a School of Tropical Medicine. And it turned out through my sleuth detective work, late 80s, early 90s, I found out that there was more boxes that were located in the basement of that facility. And at that time, I have to tell you, the place was fairly run down. It was on Canal Street. It's still there now. Now it's been rebuilt and it's beautiful. But I found the original treatise of Sarah Stewart. And for those of you guys who don't know the story, part of this was in the Rick Rubin RFK Jr. podcast. When I told Bobby Kennedy, you remember when David Ferry was killed and Jim Garrison was at the murder scene, Garrison got clued in to this whole story about Ochsner, this Sarah Stewart, and Mary Sherman because he found part of Sarah Stewart's treatise at the murder scene in David Ferry's place. Now, why has this not been well covered? The place that really uncovered it the most was actually Oliver Stone's movie JFK.
Mm.
They didn't talk about Sarah Stewart's findings there, but Garrison did have it. And if you remember in the movie, they showed you the picture of the mice running around. Never talked about the mice or anything else. Never got into Osher, never got into the whole story. You have to know the reason why. Oliver Stone also is not his name. His name is Oliver Silverstein. The person that funded JFK was an Israeli spy. He was a very wealthy guy, but he's the one that funded that movie. The reason why the movie was crafted the way it was made accurately, but it was made so that you would never ask the questions that I'm trying to explain to you right now. That there was a big link between Israel, JFK's assassination, the trial of Clay Shaw, and this story with these two doctors. And it turns out those little white mice that show up in the JFK story are kind of the reason I wound up going to Suriname. So in the basement of Charity Hospital, I find bits and pieces. There is part of the story that I need to explain to you that I didn't do a good job by design on Danny Jones, with Bobby, with Rick, or any other podcast I've ever done, because I didn't think it was safe to really talk about until probably a guy like Bobby Kennedy gets into HHS and is able to really go pedal to the metal. And, today on February 14th, he got approved yesterday. So that's the reason I feel comfortable talking about this kind of stuff now.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened is, and I do hope when people listen to this podcast, they do go back and watch Oliver Stone's JFK, because you're going to need some of this context, just like you're going to need the context of the video that you're going to put up about what happened in Suriname and why it's so important. In the movie, you will see that right at the end, there is a discussion about what happened to Clay Shaw. And if you know anything about the movie, Oliver is trying to push the story to the CIA, to the FBI, as they're the ones that killed him. That's why it gets it away from Israel. But you need to look at the last information that's dropped. In 1979, Richard Helms, the leader of the CIA, finally admits that Clay Shaw is a CIA asset. The other thing is, Clay Shaw also died of a turbo cancer.
Whoa.
Okay? You may not know that. They show you in the movie all the time that he's smoking, meaning Clay Shaw.
Right.
So they're trying to make it so that, you'll assume that the lung cancer that he got is associated with the smoking.
Right.
Turns out, in this story, everybody who's tied to this polio JFK story is eliminated by this turbo cancer. I mentioned that to Danny Jones,
Yep.
With Jack Rubenstein, and or Jack Ruby, as most people know him. But you'll see that there's this overriding trend. Now, why am I bringing this up? You may think it's esoteric. Turns out Richard Helms in 1973 was the person that destroyed all the files for MK Ultra, which is the reason why you don't understand how polio, JFK, and Robert Becker story all linked to the MK Ultra story.
And those files were at Charity Hospital.
They were at Charity Hospital, but also in the basement of the Tulane University Tropical School of Medicine. And I was clued into that by the ladies that worked in the basement of Charity Hospital. So what did I do? When I found out that Helms destroyed all the MK Ultra stuff, how did I find that out? That was 1976, 77, during the Church Commission, where on national TV, we find out that Helms ordered the destruction in 73, so nobody would find any of this information out that we're sharing now, because obviously it's not just a story of, we have media people in there, which now we know from USAID, but it actually is tied to the JFK assassination.
Right.
So that's the real reason the MK Ultra stuff is destroyed. And then we find out in 79 that the same guy, Richard Helms, director of the CIA, also admits 5 years after Clay Shaw's dead that he was a CIA asset. Got it. So when you put this all together, you find out that Sarah Stewart's manual is in the basement of these hospitals. In other words, Richard Helms did not destroy everything. There was copies left. Now, the original stuff that I saw, unfortunately, was destroyed in 2005.
Mm.
Not through any act of my own. It's called Hurricane Katrina.
Yeah.
That's where this whole area in New Orleans was flooded. So most of that stuff was lost. That stuff was in a box from the time I read it in 1992 all the way through 2005. Those files were never destroyed, and I made sure that I knew exactly where they were because I hid them in the base of those places because I knew someday down the road this stuff would be important to talk about. But it was in Sarah Stewart's thesis where I actually saw the answer, potential answer for SV40. If you know the story that I've laid out with Danny Jones, is that the government, because of Oshner, decided to use radiation to eradicate SV40 from the genome. Because obviously after 53, when we started to understand DNA, the whole idea of the National Cancer Institute, which Oshner was the first leader of, was we should use radiation to eradicate that. It turned out that Sarah Stewart always knew that was a bad idea. And she
It
tried
makes it stronger, right?
Right. That's exactly what it did. Why? Because it took little pieces, broke it up, and that made it more virulent. We now know that because Kevin McKiernan has actually found that's exactly what DNA plasmids do. Remember, what is a DNA plasmid? It makes DNA really, really small in lots of pieces. You've heard about his paper that's come out. There's 60 billion DNA plasmids per jab, no matter what it is. The Pfizer ones tend to have SV40 in it. There's now some new data from the last time I talked to you that Moderna may actually have some SV40 in it as well.
No way.
So we're kind of, as I told you, this story is going to continue to evolve over time. But now that Bobby's in and Trump's named him, I think a lot of this stuff will be discoverable if the government allows Bobby to do it. I don't know if that's going to happen with some of the people that have been placed around Kennedy,
Right.
Jim O'Neill, and things like that. These are people who are big pharma plants that are going to try to keep a lot of the story down. But for this podcast, the thing that's the most important is this is where I got the idea, and it's not my idea. It's what I read in Sarah Stewart's journal, that she thought the answer was not radiation. She thought the answer was isotopic fractionations in water tables that would be around some chemicals. She called them at that time chemokines, if I'm not mistaken. And it was very, very weird the way she wrote it because she put it in quotations. And I remember reading that the first time. I said, what the fuck is a chemokine? I had no idea really what the term was, back in 92, 93. But she was the first lady that came up with this idea, and she wrote this like in the 1940s, which to me,
wow,
it's kind of amazing. And the reason she got the idea, this is show you how smart this lady was. She worked in Enrico Fermi's lab at the University of Chicago, and she knew that to make a nuclear chain reaction, to control it, you had to use deuterium and water. So she actually had the information that was going to go into the Manhattan Project to know that the answer may not be the radiation. It actually may be the thing to slow the process down.
Right.
And unfortunately, that never got to the top chain in this bioweapons program, but it was written down in her thing. Now, that thesis gets lost to history. The only reason that thesis comes out anywhere in this story, Alexis, is because David Ferrie is killed after JFK. And it turns out Garrison finds this thesis. That is the reason why Oliver Stone had to put the mice and the rats in the story. Why? Because remember, who did he originally get the story from? He got it from the Garrison family. The people that I told you were, nurses that I worked with in the ICU. So if that wasn't in there, even though it technically does implicate the people in the desert, in the Middle East, tied to the story, he doesn't develop this line of the story. But why was it important for me in this story? I realized immediately, now that we are aftermarket data 2025, we see all the problems associated with COVID, with, you know, the clotting, the autoimmunity, the prion diseases, the turbo cancers, all the things that we're beginning to see. It made me realize what I learned in the basement of Cherry Hospital and the basement of that tropical medicine place, that maybe the answer was in the water micelles that are around special chemicals. And then what happens in 2023? All of a sudden, we find out that this parasitic drug, ivermectin, that also is described by Big Pharma, believe it or not. This happens in the 1960s and 70s.
It was discovered by Merck, I think.
Correct. It was discovered by Merck, but I don't give Merck the credit. It was a Japanese
researcher, yeah.
researcher who actually found it in the dirt about 1 hour south of Tokyo in a forest that he thought, for some reason, he had some kind of insight. And believe it or not, I wrote a blog about it today before I got on with you.
Oh, great.
Because I thought it was important. You know, now that Bobby's out, I can let the rest of the story go. And he found that he thought that he could help people by finding this chemical. So what was the natural chemical that was made in the decentralized forest in and around Tokyo? It's called ivermectin, with an A, ivermectin. So what did this researcher do? He began taking between 8 and 12 chemicals, and he began to start screwing around with bond angles and bonds. He also used isotopic fractions to change ivermectin into ivermectin. And he found out that ivermectin actually had some pretty impressive properties. Now, where did Merck go off the rails? The reason they developed this drug is twofold. They thought it had no activity against bacteria, and they also thought it had no activity against viruses, because at that time, they didn't have the molecular tools to really understand what was going on. The other thing that they found, and this is the reason they developed, they couldn't believe the therapeutic index for this drug. Yeah. You know that when you have a drug, all drugs have side effects. Well, it turns out ivermectin truly was one of the first drugs that was ever found by Big Pharma that literally you could give it in whopping doses and not kill people. And none of them could believe that that was the case, because what they didn't realize is something that the Japanese scientists did, is that when you have a chemical that comes out of a decentralized pharmacy that's acted on by light water magnetism, that there's something special about that very issue. And it turned out that was true with ivermectin. So ivermectin then goes on, as you know, to be used for parasites. It goes on to treat river blindness. And one of the things that's really interesting about river blindness, this is a disease that's called, most people know, called elephantitis. That elephantitis actually is very much like a turbo cancer. What does it do? It absconds T regulator cells that affect T natural killer cells. So these diseases actually cause a paucity of these cells to be present. Therefore, the disease manifests. In other words, it's an immune modulatory problem. And this is where the story of ivermectin changes, where very much like Meyer Lansky's idea to create Bitcoin with David Chaum comes when it gets open sourced, ivermectin becomes open sourced. And then the researchers that are working at Merck start to really ask some very interesting questions. And eventually, by the 2000s, you know, after the Nobel Prize for ivermectin is given in 2015. But from 1987 on, Merck does something very interesting, and I have to give them credit for this. They decide to unleash this drug on the world to help with these parasitic diseases, because they are trying to build goodwill with people, because they know there's other drug developments that they're going to harm people. And it turns out they understand the issue with the vaccine. Why? Anybody who knows Dr. Hillman and his ties to the vaccine program, he's considered the father of vaccination. Believe it or not, he's also linked to this story via Bernice Eddy. Most people in Big Pharma who are centralized, like the people that you work with in Princeton, they look at Hillman as one of the fathers of, modern vaccinology in the United States. But it turns out that Hillman gets a lot of credit that Bernice Eddy should have, because why? She was also buried
She got
in this
canceled.
story. Correct. She's probably one of the original counsel of the canceled even before Becker. And when I saw this, I thought back to the things that I read in Sarah Stewart's journal and her thesis. And I thought about these new findings from 2000 on, that ivermectin actually works in cancers and no one actually knows the reason why. And I began to realize that some of the other drugs that are also associated with these parasites, these are quantum mechanical effects.
Mm.
So when I thought about how ivermectin was originally formed and found by the Japanese scientist outside of a golf course in a forest, I said, I wonder if we go to different forests all over the world, could we find similar compounds that have been made over 4 billion years that are out there that may help people that have jab complications who took, the jab for whatever reason? It's immaterial. So I started looking at different forests all over the world where the answer would be. And I was looking for specific evidence in the literature of weird diseases that were being cured that, no one ever thought of. And I really had a dry tap until I believe it was 2022. And the story that I started working with Kevin about, I had to get Kevin some proof that SV40 was in the jab.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I went back to work. And I made sure that Kevin would find that information.
Mm-hmm.
And he did. And he proved it. And then Philip Buchholz backed it up. Then the next part of the equation was there proof out there that there was drugs out there that could be repurposed that actually may help some of the side effects related to this jab? And it turned out the link between Merck, ivermectin was the big key. And I started to see papers out there where ivermectin was being used in off-label because now it was off patent, and it was helping people with really bizarre cancers. I mean, cancers that are not considered treatable by modern oncologists, like sarcomas, things like that are just deadly. And I started to see these case reports, and I was going, is this the answer? Is this the answer that we're looking for? That we need to go look for novel chemicals that are created like this. So in the journey, the last step that I made was when I got on that cruise ship in Panama. And I decided to go look for some answers deep in the jungle. And if you know anything about the Amazon basin, most people think about the Amazon from the Brazilian side.
Mm-hmm.
I decided to go the opposite way because of things that I learned in the paper by Sarah Stewart in her thesis. It made more sense to go examine what was going from the top into the jungle and talk to the people there, especially now that we're in a post-COVID world. The part of the equation I didn't know was what the experience was with people in Colombia, Venezuela, French Guyana, British Guyana, or Suriname. I didn't know, did they follow the same pathway that we did in the Western world, under the direction of Fauci? And when I physically got to this part of South America, I found that every other place I've been to in South America, they were affected the way Fauci unleashed this.
Mm-hmm.
I get to the top of South America, I find the same thing is true in Colombia, Venezuela, but then the story begins to change in French Guyana and British Guyana, and it really changed in Suriname. So what did I find? These Amazon conservatory people, these are run by NGOs.
Mm-hmm.
What did NGOs do now that this story has been unleashed, by Elon Musk? Is money was sent to these places to basically take the bullshit narrative that Fauci and the gain of function people created so that these people all over the world would adapt to the vaccines. And immediately these NGOs polluted political processes in all these countries. So I found out very specifically in French Guyana, which is next door neighbor, to Suriname, that there is a part of a disputed border between these two countries, and there's also Amazon people there. The NGO that was affiliated with Gates and Gavi was linked to the largest mosquito factory in South America, which is in Medellin, which
Wow.
is doing a lot of GMO changes with that, which I thought was very interesting. Then I found out that the link between that paper that you probably saw me link to about 8 months ago, when they found 51 to 53 atoms that were in the COVID jab that shouldn't have been
Yep.
there. I found companies through NGOs that were doing the same thing in the tributaries of the water of the Amazon rainforest through geoengineering. And that's when I got really interested. So I started to talk to the people that were down in those forests in Guyana, the disputed territory, and I found out that all of those people took the jab. And guess what else I found out? These people were worse than the people we saw in the United States and in
Whoa.
Europe. Even though they were at 3.5, 4 north latitude, these people were having significant problems, but not the way they presented at high latitudes. So they were able to take 4 and 5 jabs, and they got problems. And what did they do when they developed problems? This was the most interesting part of the story. They sought out other people in the rainforest to see if they could be helped, because their own people were getting sick. Even the shamans down there couldn't help, because the number one thing that they were getting afflicted by was brain problems. They couldn't think like they used to think before. So then my attention turned towards the Amazon rainforest in Brazil that had another conservatory group towards it. That NGO also pushed the vaccines. Those tribes there also used the vaccines, but here was the big difference. Unlike the people in Guyana, the people in Brazil also used electromagnetic radiation with cell phones and lights. That was introduced because, remember, this is where they clear cut the forest.
Right.
Western ideas also got in. Those people had the exact footprint of the aftermarket data that the ethical skeptic and Kevin McKiernan have been talking about for 3 years. That's
Wow.
when I knew there was a difference between these two countries. So obviously, country we haven't talked about yet, that's right in the middle of these two countries, is Suriname. And that's the reason I became very interested in there, because I needed to find out, was there some link between Sarah Stewart's journal and what the people locally on the ground found or not? So here's where the story really flips. So I meet a Bitcoiner at Adopting Bitcoin here in El Salvador when I gave the talk when Sergey Brin turned off the internet.
Yep.
And I find out that she's a politician. At least that's what she tells me. She's interested in becoming, the leader of Suriname. When you talk to her, you think she's a decentralized savage. And I thought, yeah, this is really interesting that, I don't know anything about this person. I started to talk to other Bitcoiners, in the know that have, a lot more money than I do about, the political process, down in South America, because I really don't know a lot about it.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, what I was told was that she really had no chance of doing anything politically, based on the insiders that I'm talking about. Remember, a lot of these people are around the people that you would know in Maha.
Mm-hmm.
And I decide to go down there and do my own homework. In other words, you always hear me tell you, it's the mark of an educated mind to take something you don't believe and go and examine it for yourself and decide what's going on. So when I get there, I had listened to a podcast, a guy named Frank Corvo, he did with someone named Samson Mao. Samson Mao works with Edwin Rivas here in El Salvador, a big Bitcoin company called Jan3. Jan3 because that's actually linked to Bitcoin's history. And Samson basically, in this podcast, launches this person's political career, meaning that without that podcast, nobody in Bitcoin circles knows anything about this person. And I believe that that opportunity was taken full advantage of by this person. And then the story got generalized all over the internet, specifically through X, because that's where Bitcoin Twitter is. okay, yeah, I'm going to run for president. I'm going to try to use oil, gas. I'm going to sell the oil and gas. I'm going to make, do Bitcoin. I'm going to do thorium mining. And also, I want to do something with the rainforest. And of course, this is a message based on the story that I just told you that I've been unleashing and storing for 30 years that really intrigued me. So when I went to Suriname with Chantel, within 2 days, I found out that the story that got unleashed on Corvo's podcast with Sam Samao really was a half truth. In fact, down in Suriname, everybody uses Facebook and Instagram to communication. We found out that Zuckerberg was working with the criminals in the United States, so the truth would never come out. So I realized that everybody in Suriname was blind to the story that you and I both know. The stories that we have told on not only your podcast, but the stories I've told on Danny, the stories that I told with Bobby Kennedy, they had no earthly idea about Fauci, the gain of function research, how it linked to A, linked to Becker. They had no idea of any of this.
Wow.
And the local political parties that were in Suriname, specifically the oldest one, which is NPS, called the National Party of Suriname, they were basically a front tied to an NGO that basically gave the jabs out to everybody in the top and middle portion of the country. Wow. But it turned out that the decentralized savages, the Amerindians that I was interested in the deep south part of the country, who are also being affected by the NGOs, they didn't follow any of the things of the people in the top part of the country. They also didn't follow the things of the people in French Guiana, and they certainly didn't follow the things that were going on in Brazil, which I thought was interesting. And the more homework I did, after 2 days of being there, I realized that this person who lured me to Suriname was actually spewing a half-truth to many decentralized savages, telling the world on X that she was looking to change the world. But when I got down there, the campaign and her strategy had nothing to do with Bitcoin, nothing to do with real decentralization. She was actually trying to get into this old party that was completely corrupted, that was led by a guy named Gregory Rusland. Gregory Rusland is a corrupt politician that is really the reason why Suriname is in the position that it's in and has been there.
How long has he been in there for?
To be honest, I don't really know, but I will tell you, and because I have to be very factually correct here, even though it may sound like the person we're talking about was maybe nefarious, I don't want to say it was totally nefarious, because I talked Suriname, was 70 years old. I'm not going to tell you his name because I don't want anything to happen to these people, because I think they're good people. But he explained to me their parliamentary system. And after having this discussion with him at dinner one night, I kind of realized why this young Bitcoiner was using the plan that she was using to try to impact the political scene in Suriname. In other words, I understood it better. The problem is, if I wasn't the person to uncover this, I think people like Samson, people like Edwin Rivas, people like, Max and Stacy, any of the Bitcoiners, they would absolutely call this person out, flame them, and burn them to the ground, and never invite them to another conference ever again. But I actually began to understand kind of what she was doing and why she was doing it. I didn't agree with what she said. And one of the problems that developed the first probably 7 days that I was there, I basically said in 2 days, I'm out on this. I don't think you're doing this right. I think when you're not telling the whole truth and nothing but the truth, that it can only lead to bad things. To me, that's the shit corner way of doing stuff. And then over the next week, when I have this meeting with the old political party leader, and he explains to me how the elections have changed and how the parliamentary system is, I began to understand the political strategy a little bit better. But it turns out the other homework that I did down there, talking to the people, or I should say the right people, it turns out the real political change, the where the leadership should be in all these countries. I'm talking about Brazil and the whole top of South America should be with the Amerindians. Why? The most amazing thing I find out is that these people, influenced by Western forces tied to American money and corruption, reject they reject not only the virus but also the jab.
Good for them.
And here's the crazy thing. They don't know any of the story that all of you know. They have no idea who Anthony Fauci is. They have no idea what gain of function is. They have no idea that the virus is created. They have no idea of all the things that are being elucidated right now in the United States. Why? None of them use X. Some of them don't even have cell phones. Turned out the only people that did were the people in Brazil and the people in Guyana. And when I realized that, I was like, why would Bitcoiners, when they understand this, get behind somebody who really represents the people on the surface or the middle part of the country where the power bases are? Why wouldn't you actually realize that the fifth world people really have the first world ideas? Because they are complete decentralized savages, meaning they have not been afflicted by any of the propaganda from the machine. And I'm sitting there and I'm looking at this and I'm thinking about the story that I told you about Sarah Stewart and Mary Sherman. So I started to ask some questions. And let's just put it this way. I can't tell you everything that I found, but I can tell you this, that the people who took the jab, I am very optimistic that there is an answer for SV40. If you would have talked to me before this trip, I was very pessimistic, extremely pessimistic. I basically told people in my blogs, I think the only thing that you can do right now is go to the tropics and try to offset these risks. Well, guess what? In this trip, I found out there's people that live at 2.5 north that are sick as fuck, just like you are in New Jersey or New York. So guess what? It may not be the answer that you got to pick up and go somewhere else, because it turns out that even changing the environment when you have a bioweapon that's been injected in you may only offer you, a modicum of improvement. And it's not worth for you picking up your whole life and selling, all your stuff to move. But did I find that the story of ivermectin is very much well alive deep in the Amazon basin? They're doing it a different way. I like to call it the new version of the philosophy of touch. How 4 billion years of light, water, and magnetism is operating on the water table around very specific parts of this area that have not been touched yet by man, meaning no electromagnetic pollution, no geoengineering, and about 15,000 years of shamans basically doing exactly what Merck, Pfizer, and Big Pharma do. They are cultivating the knowledge. They are, the way I like to think about it, they are the protectors of the Library of Alexandria of decentralized science right there.
Wow.
And we need to do things to help them to protect, so that eventually we can help the 6 billion people out there, that Kevin McKiernan, the ethical skeptic, Philip Buchholz have now elucidated as these people are going to have major problems. I mean, you know about Mary Bowden, you know about John Bowden, you know about all the people that are out there that have been fighting this battle. We need to get rid of the messenger RNA platform. I'm going to tell you that my message probably has changed tremendously right with this podcast because of this trip, because I'm no longer interested in just eliminating the messenger RNA platform. I'm interested in fixing the problem so that if government, you know what I said about Callie and Cassie means, that they were there to keep Operation Warp Speed intact for Big Pharma. I believe their plans, I believe their Fabian's Council of Foreign Relations people, but there are other people now that are around Bobby Kennedy, now that he's in, like John O'Neill. These are people that are DOD people. They're not going to let that bioweapons program go to waste. So does it make as much sense for Uncle Jack to keep pounding on why Casey never put the word vaccine in her book and why in the executive order vaccine's not in there again? No, I think the answer I just found on this trip after 54 days is that irrespective of what they do, there's an answer. And we need to do everything we can as decentralized savages to harvest that answer. Each one of you that are understanding what I'm saying, you are now decentralized clinicians, and you need to help by utilizing your decentralized money, your time, your smarts. You could actually save millions or billions of people that are afflicted by this. And I think it's disingenuous just to go after getting rid of the platform. Why? Because if we get rid of the platform, that's great, and then no other new people can get sick. But the real problem is we've got about 6 billion people at risk.
Yeah.
And we need to start to focus on that problem so that we can get it. Now, do I believe that that process needs to be partially political? Unfortunately, yes. So this comes back to the video that you put on in the original part of, I guess, this podcast. And in the original part of the podcast, when people see it, I was asked about 4 days ago to go to a political event given by NPS, which is the National Party of Suriname. The other person that was there is also a decentralized savage. His name is Samuel Coleman. Samuel gave the Swiss perspective to the people in Suriname about how they may want to organize their government. And in his talk, he showed that direct democracy in Switzerland, the reason why it was so successful is because they implemented this in the 1200s. This is way before politicians understood the political game. And that's the reason why this system has really been powerful for them. The other thing that's obviously different, Switzerland's really small. It's not as culturally diverse as most other places. And this has stayed intact. The other thing is the Swiss have done a really good job of backing their currency with gold better than anybody else. So this is what makes the Swiss experiment interesting. But even with all that, what was Samuel's delineation in his hour-long talk to the NPS people that occurs before the video that you're going to show when I come on, is that he tells them, look, we have less corruption than anywhere else in the world, but where our corruption still exists is in the money. And because even with a gold-backed currency that keeps its value, that's the corruptible part of this. And as a Swiss parliamentarian, he's been in for 8 years. He's been advocating for Bitcoin even in the Swiss system because he knows that if you fix the problem with money, you can fix other problems in the world. And that was really the message that he delivered to Gregory Rusland, who's the chairman of the NPS party. Now, Rusland is so clueless that he did not realize that Bitcoin was the antidote to extinct himself.
Mm-hmm.
He had no earthly idea how these things were linked. It was pretty clear to me sitting in the audience, how this was when it was going on. And I said, this is a good thing because he's one of Suriname's biggest problems. And his people don't realize that he's a big problem. So how will I attack this message? Because I know that decentralization is important. So I decide to use one of the terms that Samuel used in his talk when he said that the Swiss are the least corrupt of all countries. I got up there and started to tell people, well, let me tell you about my country, which is the most corrupt country. Why? And I lead through the story of how I got introduced to Bukele, how my job got stolen through Big Pharma, how they turned my business off. And the story was basically corruptible money and also corruptible science. And I explained to them the two holes in our Constitution were medical freedom and money. And I said, if we fix money, which now it appears that Trump wants to do, because remember now, here we are, this is like February 10th, 11th, when this talk is going on, everybody in the world is learning that Elon is finding out that these NGOs are the key way that propaganda has gone all over the world. Well, it dawns on this guy while I'm giving the talk that he starts giving me throat slashing signs. He doesn't want the truth to come out. And here's the irony, Alexis. The irony is, remember that Suriname used to be a Dutch colony.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know that the Netherlands has legal charges brought up on Gates right now?
Yeah.
So he is completely unaware of how his colonial captors are actually going after the person that he's actually trying to protect. And you know the reason why is because Gregory Rusland from MPS is actually getting NGO money.
Wow.
And his people don't even have a clue about this. And turns out the person that's trying to displace him, here's the ultimate irony. You would think a decentralized savage would get it. She didn't fucking get it either at all. And she didn't realize that I delivered to her on a silver platter the perfect way to take Caesar out. Instead, she comes up to me and Chantel and tells me that her political career is over because I'm telling them how bad the corruption is in the United States.
Yep.
If you can actually put two and two together, this kind of tells, I think, the world, even though she sells herself as a decentralized savage, she's no savage at all. And I think part of the reason why it took me a while to figure this out, a couple of days after I got home, because of what happened to her in the past, specifically with her dad, her focus really is on revenge. She really wants to do the things that she wants to do because they killed her father. And she blames different cartels. She's blaming the drug cartels that really control Suriname. And it turns out she has no earthly idea. The biggest cartels in the world are the ones that you and I are talking about. That's Merck. That's Pfizer. That's AstraZeneca. That's GlaxoSmithKline. She has no idea that the Colombian drug cartels actually gave better medical information than big pharma cartels. And the irony is, Gregory Rusland doesn't realize that either. And here she's trying to get control of that party so she can run for president. And what does she say to me? She says, well, my career is over. So because of what I said about the United States. So here's the irony. Once they pull me off the stage on live TV in Suriname, Rusland does exactly what you would expect a corrupt politician to do. He comes out on the stage. They tell the audience that they have no more time left for me to talk. Then he proceeds to talk all in Dutch, not in English, so I know what he's saying. He apologizes to the live TV audience that he didn't know that I was coming. And as you show the video, you'll see just how eloquent my introduction was by his party, which kind of tells you that he's full of shit and that I was invited by them to come to speak about corruption in government. It gets even worse. When he apologizes, this would have been the perfect opportunity for someone who is trying to eliminate him from the political scene to get up. You shouldn't be apologizing to the people. You should be apologizing to Jack. Because he's actually telling you how to end the corruption. And you just proved this point about just how fucking corrupt you are. So here's what I'm going to say. You cannot be a decentralized savage if you miss an opportunity this big. If you think getting $300,000 or $400,000 or $500,000 is what you need to win a popularity contest, when I just showed you that you didn't need anything to win right off the bat. Because guess what? This story, what's going on locally, actually proved my point that no one really understood what was going on in the Western world, in this country. And that was worth millions of dollars in political strategy. but it was lost. So what's my message to the people who took the jab? I'm very much more optimistic about what I found in Suriname. Why is this a big deal? You know, I've connected you with Nicole. I care a lot about what has happened to Nicole. I didn't give Nicole much hope when I met with her the last week in November here in El Salvador when she came to my member event. And she just faced a pretty big problem of her own.
Yeah.
The flip side of that is I want Bitcoiners to know that their people are in your midst, that they're not who you think they really are. Doesn't mean they're bad people, just means they have really bad strategy. I would make this akin to maybe a Bitcoiner owning Bitcoin, but also having a nice stockpile of shit coins. And unfortunately, relying on a shitcoin strategy to try to help change the world, that's not something that I think that we should really get behind. But I'm going to warn everybody of what I found on this trip. I found some of the story of Sarah Stewart and Mary Sherman out there. Do I believe now that there is an answer for SV40? Do I believe that there's an answer for DNA plasmids? Do I believe that we can reverse some of the stuff that hasn't even hit the airwaves yet, which is coming prion diseases, amyloidosis, autoimmunity, turbo cancers, all those little things? If you look at the podcast that I did with Danny and Mary, not the one with Callie, but just us, the last slide that I showed was the original SV40 spike that was tied to the polio jabs, and then the one that started with COVID that is almost straight up in the air. That's the curve that ethical skeptic Kevin McKiernan, Philip Buchholz are really concerned about now. That's the one that I'm concerned about now. Do I think that we can actually bend that line and maybe even make it go the other way? The science, the decentralized science, tells me that I should be much more optimistic. Do I think ivermectin is just the clue that that's the case? The answer is yes. That's what I believe. Do I believe that the jab now need to go to places like this and spend their money and uproot their lives? Not as much as I used to believe before. Do I still think it's prudent until we're able to really test and get those answers? The answer is yeah, I do believe that. Do I believe that there's a path, a decentralized path to doing this? Yes. Have I physically met people that have gotten better, like reversed these diseases? Yes, I have. Do I want everybody out there to know that there are Bitcoiners out there, that intentions are good on the political scene, but they have really bad thinking ability, meaning they're not first principle thinkers? Yeah, you need to be aware of them too. Ultimately, the trip for me was transformative. It was shifting. Even though there was a lot of things that happened to me, it's not really a good feeling to be worried about being yanked off live TV and potentially somebody coming after you in the middle of the night before you get on the plane to get out of there. There was something exhilarating about that, but also something disconcerting to let you know that these forces are still out there, and to know that the most nefarious people, criminals that I've talked about in our government, in the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, and in Big Pharma, because they're linked, that we still have a lot of work to do to put these people out of business. And just because Bobby's in, that battle just begins. But I want people to know that you need to always remain curious. You always need to work on first principles to go after the truth. And I also want people to know who did comply and took the jab, that while you may feel like the people did in the 1980s and 90s when we had no drug solutions for people with HIV, I think in the next 10 or 15 years, we're going to have answers for the 6 billion of you that got that bioweapon loaded up into your software program called DNA. I think there's an answer.
I mean, the crazy thing about you talk about the forces that are still very omnipresent in a lot of ways, and the fact that they're like, I feel like Rusland is a great example of how these forces are propagated by individuals making decisions in a given moment. It's not like they're, exerting their will without the individuals, they have no power actually. So we each have to look inside of ourselves and find those centralized parts of ourselves that propagate misinformation and actual misinformation and things that we don't actually understand just because we think that we were, told to believe these things or programmed to believe these things from a young age. So I think it's a really good lesson in self-reflection and being able to call that out and when you see it, basically.
Well, I'm going to tell you something else that I think you would have appreciated. Chantal and I met two tour guides there. One guy was 40 years old. Another guy was 19. The 19-year-old was a mix between Japanese and Caribbean. Very interesting cat.
Wow.
The older guy is one of the Amerindians who is in the Amherst tribe. And he's famous because he actually came up with the #1 single in Suriname when he was a young man. So that's how he got into the tourism business. And he knows a lot about his country. They didn't know anything about Bitcoin. If you look at my Instagram, you would have seen me orange pilling them.
Yeah.
We're down there. They both got their first bit of Bitcoin from me.
Oh.
And I taught them this lesson. There's a really cool picture of us standing next to each other in front of something called the cockroach room, whereas where the Dutch used to basically mutilate, punish all the slaves that they brought in. That's why we took the picture there. And right behind that wall is where one of their presidents, who was important of them getting rid of the Dutch, he actually did some bad stuff where he shot a couple of his political opponents. And you can see, the canisters of the 12 shots on the wall where those people died. And these kids taught me this story about Suriname. They taught me about why this country is so different, than Switzerland and why it's so different than the United States. But here's the key. The young kid, Savio is his name. I'm okay to use his name. After I get pulled off the stage, he comes right up to me and you know what he says? And you would never think a kid this young got it. He goes, Jack, you just showed me that Gregory Rusland is the politician that we need to get rid of.
Whoa.
You just showed me what corruption looks like. He goes, I don't need the other lesson because I just realized this politician doesn't want me to know the truth. He goes, This is like taking chapters out of a book and never knowing the story. And I said to him, that's exactly what happened with Sarah Stewart's story in the United States. Chapters in her thesis were removed where Garrison could never know the whole true story. Oliver Stone did the same thing in JFK. He removed chapters of the story so that you would never know that it actually ties back to Israel.
Half-truths.
Think about it. That's what Dr. Fauci did in The Gain of Function, where he moved chapters of the book that Ralph Barrett did that you would never figure out why we have bioweapons labs in Ukraine and in Wuhan, and why the people that were running this shell game never wanted you to know that NGOs and gain of function was done. So you'll be surprised about this, Alexis, when I tell you, because I don't think I've ever told you this, but you know that I wrote that law for Bukele 3 years ago. Do you know that one of the parts of the law is that it makes NGOs illegal?
Whoa.
It was written 3 years ago. Why? Because I can tell you that I knew that was the key part of the architect game plan of how they were doing what they were doing. And I shared that information with Bobby Kennedy the day that we did the Rick Rubin podcast, because, he did a great book about Fauci from Fort Detrick up to now. And I told him, so Bobby, you need to know the story from Fort Detrick back, because you need to know truly what the purpose of MK Ultra was. MK Ultra was how we got the NGOs. And they were the whole acronym, the word NGO should be considered a conspiracy theory because they're not non-governmental organizations. They are governmental organizations that are designed to work in the shadows because chapters are pulled out of that book. Because the press is paid off by these people, that's the reason why the truth never hits the public. That's the reason why Kevin McKiernan and Philip could never know what was in Sarah Stewart and Mary Sherman's work because all of that was not published. And who tried to get it published? Bernice Eddy. And Bernice Eddy was ended because of that. And when you actually see and hear this story today, where we are now, considering everything that's come through in the United States in the last 2 months while I've been away, ironically, this is the really irony part of the story for me. All the stuff that I felt implicitly that I knew and diagnosed 30 years ago, when you see it manifest and the whole world wakes up that you're not a crazy motherfucker, that you're actually a pretty good diagnostician, and then you see the same effect in a country, even worse than what you see in Europe and the United States, you begin to realize this is aiding and abetting criminals everywhere all over the world, and we need to end it. And even when your heart's in a good place, say as a new politician, and maybe you're decentralizing your money, but not anything else, hopefully those people begin to look at podcasts like this and reflect on really what the fuck they're doing so that they're completely congruent with the message of being a decentralized savage. And and I know, I don't know how you're going to feel about this part, but I think it needs to be said. You were supposed to have that person on your podcast to talk about this.
That's right.
They magically fucking backed out. So
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you, I don't think that's an admission of guilt, but you know what I think it's an admission of? That you're not a decentralized savage. And I think it also goes to your leadership. I think you may call it and hide behind the idea of a political strategy, but I'm here to tell you, after my time down there, I fundamentally 100% disagree. If we're going to change the world and we're going to do it right, we're going to do it in decentralized fashion. 100% of the time, we're not going to fucking make excuses for anything. We're going to do it the way we should do it, by giving people freedom and sovereignty back. And the reason I feel very, very strongly about this is the story that I told you about Savio. Literally, this is a kid that has no science background, doesn't know anything that's going on. And literally within my 15-minute talk with that little video, he fucking got the message loud and clear. He saw corruption for the first time in his own country. And he said to me, Jack, this cannot stand. Let me tell you something. Politician needs to fucking put a snaffle bit on that and reins. That's how you change a country.
Well, I imagine that a lot of people watching you live as well felt the same way because he's getting up there apologizing, not saying that it's not true what you said, just basically apologizing for the information being available. That's a red flag if there ever was one.
Well, but you think that way, but you have to remember something, Alexis, and this is important for you to hear. You're an American. You do have, a diverse background. These people are way more diverse than you are, and you have to understand the history. These people still have the colonial mindset. I have to tell you, I never in a million years would have thought that 250 years after colonialism is really destroyed in the United States, that operationally it can keep people in the dark. And I found out that the Dutch, if you want to know the truth, the Dutch, their history and how they treated these people were probably worse than Hitler, probably worse than what the United States, I should say America, has done to their imperialistic ways on people, but also even what the British did to other people. Why? The Dutch, before the British took over the world, were the dominant force. They were there. What did they do? When they found all these colonies all over the world, they basically imported slaves from different places to run their shell game. And when they exhausted the resources of one immigrant group, they went to the next one. So basically, Suriname has 6 groups of waves of slaves brought over there. When independence was given by the monarchy from the Dutch to the people of Suriname, they guaranteed that they would never have success. Why? These were people that were never taught how to lead. They were 5 different groups of people. And here's the irony. This is the reason I'm wearing this hat. I saw a synagogue next to a mosque in Suriname. These people get along like you can't imagine. Why? Because collectively they're tied together by this ethos that colonialism is what links them. And they still have a little bit of Stockholm syndrome. They have a soft spot in their heart for their captors. And that's what I saw in Rusland. And what Savio saw was not. And that president that I told you that shot his political allies, he was truly a decentralized savage. And it took me a while to figure it out. You know, I thought about Desi, because that's his first name. And I thought the first 2 days I was there, this guy was a cocksucker. And then I realized, well, he wasn't. He was so fucking mad about what the Dutch did to this country. And he realized that the Dutch, when they gave him independence in 75, they never gave him independence. They guaranteed that they would never have success. And here we are now, Alexis, 50 years later, and these people are still falling over their own dicks. They don't know how to get out of their own way. And when I tell you the story about Ruslan and this decentralized person that's trying to change things, they're both afflicted by this colonial mindset, and they don't realize it. I couldn't believe just how pervasive it was. And, you know, the craziest part of the story for me, I didn't share this with you, but, and I don't know if I will, you know, physically so you can read it. The political party leader that I told you that I really respected, who told me about how the changes went on, after the video that I was going to show the country, I actually, on my way back from learning all the good stuff about the decentralized science, I wrote the preamble for a new constitution for Suriname, and I was going to give that to them.
Yeah.
And it happened because of the actions of NPS Gregory Ruslan. Suriname never got that.
He yanked you off. He yanked you off in the middle of you giving a beautiful, you had a video recorded and you were going to read the preamble and you got yanked off the stage. Insane.
True. But I think that the accurate truth telling of this story is not just important for the decentralized scientists and people that are out there that took the job. I think that this is one of those powerful Bitcoin stories that will come out in a podcast in 2025. I have been completely shifted by what happened down there. I have to tell you, as I talk to you and I think about it, I have a controlled rage inside of me. I don't think I have been this angry since I found out how the government fucked Becker.
Wow.
That's the truth.
I mean, it's the same cycle repeating itself, basically. You're seeing it, it's a fractal.
It is. And the thing is, I think getting this story out to someone like you, because everybody knows that you're a scientist. You're not the political person, just like I'm not. And I'm telling you that this is the reason why we need to fix the money, because fixing the money gets rid of all these corruption stories, the propaganda stories, all the things that are ruining science, all the things that we want to fix, all the things, you know, that we bitch and moan about on Twitter, on podcasts every day. And the thing is, I want people to understand your intentions are great, but they're not good enough. We actually need ideas that can be executed so that we can make a decentralized world. Because guess what? More nefarious things in the world have been done with good intentions. Good intentions just not enough. And that's really the story that I want to deliver to the Bitcoiners out there that are probably going to know who I'm talking about, but don't mention at all. I want you to understand that Gregory Ruslan of NPS, he has been corrupted by the NGO money that came from the United States. My country caused that problem. I'm not giving him a pass. I'm just telling you that we need to get that information in front of the people in Suriname Because my belief, it's not all the oil money they have coming from Qatar in 3 or 4 years, or the gold from Newmont mining that's going to change their country. I think the trillions of dollars of assets that they really have is being protected by a small group of decentralized savages and keeping away from the biggest cartel on the planet, which is Big Pharma.
Yes.
That to me is the modern Library of Alexandria.
And when we're talking about that, one of the first things that's coming into my mind is like the IP around that and how pharma would just absolutely rape that Amazon rainforest and bastardize it and absolutely ruin it if they got their hands on it.
Well, that's part of the reason why I think some Bitcoiners that are out there that have the wherewithal, like, you've already met one of them. Sam Parker is a big part of me actually solving that problem. We've already got a solution for that. But the problem is, how do you get that solution in place, given all the
Outside of the
thermodynamic
US.
given to you about this? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I realized that all the things I'm trying to do in the United States, all the things I'm trying to do in El Salvador, and I realized that my focus was in the wrong place. It actually should be with the decentralized savages that are hiding the secrets that we need. And I wouldn't say hiding is a good thing. I think actually protecting them is the right answer, so that eventually we'll get out of our own way so that we can discover them.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. Actually, kind of an aside, but related somewhat because ivermectin was discovered in a similar way. I was looking up the absorption spectra of ivermectin and it's like square in the UVC range. Pretty interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, doesn't that make sense considering the stuff that we talked about? It totally
Yep.
makes sense. You consider that leptin is exactly the same way.
Yep.
And what is some of the inconvenient truths that I've shared with you on the science podcast? Like, you asked me, Jack, why are you on people's cases that look physically fit and this and that, and why are they dropping dead? And why aren't the fatties dropping dead like you said? In other words, the story is completely flipped. This is where the decentralized mindset becomes important, because you have to look at these givens and go, wait a minute, I'm thinking about this completely wrong. And it turns out that if you're jabbed, you being fat actually is an advantage. You're not going to die. And it has a lot to do with that absorption spectra story. Now, how long can you stay away from the pathology? Turns out the more fat you have, the more that the bad mojo is likely going to go in the fat.
Yeah.
And when it destroys your fat and your fat biology, yeah, you're going to stay fat, but you're not going to die. When you're physically fit and have no fat, that's where it's going to go in your heart, in your brain, in your arteries, and cause all the diseases that we know what's going on. Do I know that that's a very counterintuitive story? Absolutely. But am I trying to explain to you why the ethical skeptics data is what it is? Young, fit people, especially males, are fucking dying at unbelievable rates.
Yep.
People are coming in with no history of cancer and get a stage 4.
Yeah.
And the data is overwhelming. So instead of arguing with each other whether the data is true or not, how about we say, okay, it is, and let's fucking move forward and figure out what the fuck to do. That's the issue.
It makes a ton of sense too, because I mean, like dissolves like, the lipid nanoparticles would be attracted into adipose tissue. That makes sense. And women carry more fat than men, so it makes sense that young, fit men would be targeted more than younger, fit women, even because that body fat percent difference. It's
Think
just
about what you just said. You just sounded a lot like Jack Kruse, but before you ever met me, all these things go against like the narrative that Rhonda Patrick sells, that Peter
totally.
Tina. Do you understand
Mhm.
why sometimes that the truth can come in a package that you just can't fucking fathom being true? And guess what? That is what being a decentralized savage really is all about. It's about not giving two fucks about your convictions, your beliefs, challenging them to make sense of the data that's staring you right in the face.
I mean, technically, all scientists should be decentralized savages. Otherwise, you're not a scientist, you're a technician.
Well, I'm glad you said that, not me, because I think if I said it, there'll be a lot of people that watch this podcast and leave YouTube comments that I'm a fucking douchebag. Well, but that's the truth. I mean, and that to me is why this story, it almost continues that this is, I told Rick that the whole story about the polio stuff and SV40 and melanin, it's like the greatest story never told. But what are we just doing? This is the latest chapter of this story released. And when you begin to see this, you go back and look at some of the earlier chapters of the book and you go, oh my God. You begin to see the magnitude of this problem and why anybody could ever, put the blame squarely on the Colombian drug cartels and not realize that it's really big pharma. I mean, I get they put a bullet in your father and killed him and changed your life trajectory. But if you're truly decentralized and you trained in American universities and your brain is good and your mother sacrificed to get you out of this, do you realize how fucking much time you've wasted on
Hmm.
this revenge thing and not fucking truly done something your father and your mother would be really proud of? Change the fucking world. Forget about the revenge. Go and fix the problem for your people. And make no fucking apologies. You have one life, do something epic with it. Don't fucking give, you know, everybody a story on X and then everybody a story on Facebook a different way. That works maybe in your country, but it doesn't work. Doesn't work anymore. Not after this podcast. No, you cannot do that. And, I know there's going to be a lot of Bitcoiners that are going to read through all this and dissect it and figure it out. But I'm still going to tell you, I don't think that person's a bad person. I just think she got really bad fucking ideas from a life coach, a guy named DS Batten. He's also a fucking Bitcoiner.
Mm.
I think that guy he's a bad actor. And Bitcoiners need to know when we have bad actors in our midst, you want to find out, are they truly nefarious or they just really have shit coiny advices and they're decentralizing their money? I've met a lot of Bitcoiners in the last 5 years that I can tell you they're all decentralizing their money, but they're fucking terrible when it comes to health. And
Hmm.
I kind of feel that this story is a lot like that. I think we all need to know that you can be decentralizing your money, but doesn't mean you're decentralizing everything else in your life. And what's the message that I really want to get across in this podcast? This story that I just showed you shows you what happens when you're not decentralized in all parts of your life. Because it turns out that your reputation can get rug pulled. And I'm being really, really kind by delivering the message that I'm delivering to you now. I'm not trying to kill the messenger. I'm actually trying to teach a big lesson here. Not just for that person, but for all the other people that are listening to this message. You need to decentralize every aspect of your life. If you do that, you will be rewarded by nature.
And the biggest irony is if you actually ruined this person's political career, they would have had nothing to lose by standing up for you and saying, no, no apologies, this is true.
That you just made again. You're not a doctor, but you are, because you just made the diagnosis. You just proved my point that the way people think, they actually tell you whether they're a savage or not.
Yeah.
And you got it. You got it in this podcast where I told you the story. You got a chance to see actually what I said that you thought was so controversial. And you're like, that wasn't controversial at all. It was the
Mm-mm.
fucking truth.
Mm-hmm.
And then to see the reaction about how it went, that was the perfect time to fucking act. And when
Yeah.
that action plan didn't go the way it is, you basically told the world really who you are. Chaos always reveals your character. That's the
Mm-hmm.
reason about chaos.
That's a good point. Quick question. It's kind of a tangent, but we were talking about ivermectin. I know there's some ivermectin and fenbendazole protocols being used for cancer. What do you think about that?
I've written about it on the blog. The guy that I give the credit to is Macus. Macus is a cancer doctor from Canada.
Trying to put him in jail.
Yeah, well, he's under attack. Well, it makes sense they would put him in jail
Of
because
course.
think about where he's at, Canada.
Yeah.
Um, so I would definitely tell you that I do think there's something to it. But what I'm trying to tell people is Macus has been talking about it the last 2, 3, 4 years. What I'm telling you is data that goes back to the 90s and 2000s.
Yep.
Um, and I knew about that because of the stuff with Sarah Stewart's thesis. So yeah, I do think it's important. Do I think we need to support people like Macus, Paul Merrick, Peter Corey? Yeah, the people that I have a problem with. I haven't said this publicly, but I guess now's the time to do it. I'm not really a big fan of Dr. McCullough. I think
Yep.
Dr. McCullough has been too much of a centralized shill.
Neither is John Bowden. I just had him on. He's not a fan either.
And I think you just need to know by what Dr. Sell tells you kind of about their character. Like we were just trying to diagnose the political ramifications of the story in Suriname. I do the same thing now with the doctor side. McCullough has been on our team for a really long time, but I think in the last year, I have a lot of problems with a lot of the things that he's done. And I'm going to tell you, again, you're going to probably be shocked at this shift I'm going to give you. Elon Musk has been really good for decentralization in Maha. But I have to tell you that there's parts of Elon Musk, parts of Peter Thiel, all the people that got Trump in to do some of the cool things we have. What I fundamentally believe is that the technocrats are looking to replace the Rothschilds and Rockefellers. And I think what the technocrats may replace that system with may be even worse than what the bankers gave us.
Mm.
And I'm warning people that realize we're going through the utopia side now, but remember, there's a dystopian part of this. And where have I talked about the dystopian part? When I tried to teach you a little bit about Kali means, Cassie means, the Wojcicki sisters, and Sergey Brin. Why? Those are the architects of targeting, surveillance, technocracy, how they can take your life over, and they can use targeting to control you and turn you into an economic slave. They may not need to do it with money in the future. And do I believe that there's enough data out there that we have from Neuralink and Peter Thiel that they have the capability of doing that? And this goes all the way up to the people that are standing around Trump and Bobby Kennedy. Some of those people that are tied to the PayPal mafia crowd, the technocrats, the Sergey Brins. The reason why Larry Ellison got up and started talking about the things he talked about with, hey, maybe we can make money before we come up with these things, or what Lutnick said from the Oval Office, all those things. These people are warning you. While they're your friends now, they may not be your friends in the future. And I think some of the people that are, fucking magalicious right now, out of their minds, need to realize, taper some of your enthusiasm and remain a decentralized savage, because guess what? We ain't done yet.
Yeah. It's basically still just tribalism instead of seeing things how they are and calling people out when they deserve to be called out. And I feel like Musk is a great example because he's doing great things right now, but he also makes cars that like will kill you basically from electromagnetic pollution and is trying to terraform Mars instead of terraforming the Sahara, for example. Like he's just missing the point in so many areas that it makes me think he's just even if he has good intentions right now, that he may lead us down a path that is ultimately could be worse, like you said.
That's kind of why I told you the story about Suriname, because I agree with you. And it's the same reason you're concerned about those things with him. I'm really concerned about Neuralink
Yeah.
because he's working with some of the best neurosurgeons in the world. I can tell you, Michael Lawton at the University, Sparrow Neurologic Institute, he's doing work. And I have to tell you, some of that work, do I understand why the neurosurgeons are excited? Yeah, because, if you can cure, neurologic problems from, like, say, paralysis or, autoimmunity by putting a chip in someone's head and then using electromagnetic radiation. Yeah, that's an amazing breakthrough. But just realize that the dystopian side of that means that's also how they can control you from a satellite above.
Yeah.
And don't forget, like that's the part. Like people get caught up in the good sauce, but don't realize what the real issue is behind the technocrats. And I'm going to tell you, the guy that is the most nefarious out of them all, Sergey Brin, Larry Page. Just remember that they're the ones that have created the network that this whole surveillance thing is built on. And I was very, very disappointed to see Sergey Brin at the inauguration of Trump and not Nicole Shanahan.
Mm-hmm.
She's the utopian side of this. He's the dystopian side of it. And it's not lost on me that they used to be married and they're no longer married. And they are now on opposite sides of this battle. And I think people need to really understand that the real story inside this podcast is probably a nugget that will keep feeding you for the next 10 or 15 years. I hope people come back and listen to the things I'm saying here and understand and make the correct diagnosis and get where I'm going with this. Like, I'm not trying to take your hope and joy away that, we've now, undermined parts of the deep state. But I got news for you. The deep state, I think, is now transforming into a technocratic surveillance operation that won't need money to control you anymore. It's the ultimate MK Ultra 5.0.
There's a bit of irony buried in there too, because like even with the original deep state, as technology developed and we enter into the information age, then the information comes out that exposes them. But then it's like it's almost as if in order for the technocratic deep state to thrive, people would need to willingly choose it because they'll be presented with the information and they have to actually consciously say, yes, I want that. And that's what people are doing with all the smart homes and smart this and that. It's like people want the technology. It's like, to what end?
Well, you have to realize this is where I gave a talk last August here in El Salvador. One of the guys that was there was one of the people that was advising Bukele on artificial intelligence. And he gave a very eloquent speech, and I completely disagreed with all of it. But from the audience, I said to him, tell me what the target of AI is. Whether it's open or closed, doesn't matter. There is no target.
Exactly.
And that's the problem. And what people need to realize when you're a decentralized savage, what is AI a function of? It centralizes everything it touches. So when it centralizes everything it touches, realize if you're a decentralized savage, there's no way you can get behind AI.
Yeah.
Like, I'm okay if you want to use it to do some of your science work, to make a report, to do this and that, but it cannot replace how humans think. And because when it replaces how humans think, that means thought atrophies. Our ability to reason atrophies.
Yep.
And it's just so fundamental to me. And, I've put out a couple of Instagram posts recently where it basically says that I believe now OpenAI is the biggest risk to humanity. And, I know people like Mary Taliban, who I really respect, she's going to be mad at me because she's going to say like, no, Jack, it's the messenger RNA platform. I think I would have agreed with her 2 or 3 months ago. Right now, I don't agree with that because of what's going on right now. I know that they're not going to get rid of the messenger RNA platform. So you know how you eliminate it? You make sure you go after OpenAI and AI.
Yeah.
You need to put a snaffle bit and reins on that because right now the government, all those people are in power, and unfettered power for those people are a huge issue.
Yep. And I think we already have evidence that what you said is true about thought atrophying, because I mean, in the past, all humans used to use verbal culture and like share stories and myths, and that was how information was passed down. And then there was the printing press and we started writing things down. And now we're at the point where we can just Google whatever, and like people can't remember things. They're overly reliant on, because I think when a crutch is available, typically people will use it. And that's exactly what's happening until the point where it's like you become so codependent that you can't exist without it.
Well, I can say this to you and probably get away with it, and probably not many other people. People always make comments when I do these long format podcasts and I start talking about the history, like, dude, you have no notes. This comes out of
Exactly.
your, and I tell them, I said, do you know why? Because I don't use AI. I've actually done the heavy work that a decentralized mind needs to do. My brain works the way nature built it to work. I'm not looking for aids. I'm not looking for neurotropics. I'm not looking for AI to create reports. Like when I write blogs, you're going to see grammar errors. You're going to see spelling errors. Why? Because it comes from my head. And if you are so myopic that grammar errors and spelling bother you, you've missed the point
Yeah.
of why AI is so dangerous.
100%. 100%. And I think that we just need to get back to being human at some level. I think we just have this weird fascination with, I mean, if you follow it out, it seems like merging with technology is the ultimate goal, and it's kind of already happened. Like everybody's carrying their phone everywhere they go, and can't really live without it to a certain extent. And it's like where that goes, I guess, is Neuralink at some level. But on the other hand, I mean, I think I've heard you mention when I was visiting you actually something about there. If we think about like the sun and all of the planets as like conscious beings that are in a self-regulatory network, that maybe the sun sees what's going on here and decides to take it out, you know?
Correct. And, I would tell you, if you think about the 1950s, about like Philip Dick and all the things that he wrote about in science fiction, we have this idea that the cyborg is going to be like Terminator was. Now, I
Yeah.
would tell you that we're already cyborg. Why? Because it turns out the real story of MK Ultra was they figured out how to impact our behavior by hijacking how we think. That's really what the whole purpose of surveillance, AI, and everything's about. Now they're trying to manifest that so that the next step can be okay, we'll give you the Terminator world when we start to put chips in you. I mean, I look at my career, what was the first big leap is actually the cochlear implant. When we
Mm,
were able to put a cochlear implant and solve deafness, how could you, as a neurosurgeon, not get behind all of that? But you have to realize that was the utopian side of the story. The dystopian side now is now we have a guy who makes cars and mines lithium and puts holes in the earth to make these batteries that actually can control the process of how you think and behave from a simple flick of the switch from a satellite above your country. That to me is something that I can't get behind.
Do you think it's actually going to be possible for Neuralink to be to the extent where it's like mind reading and like that kind of thing? I just think we underestimate the complexity of the brain and like
You don't
consciousness and what
believe
it
me?
means.
Yeah, if you don't believe me, it's happening already. You've
Okay.
already experienced it with me. Why is it that you and I can sit together in front of a computer or a phone, and the next thing you know, ads show up on our phone? That's
That's true.
exactly the same thing. You don't even realize that it's already happening around you. So the problem is you can't fathom that it can happen in a biologic system, but you don't realize you have the Library of Alexandria sitting in your hand. That's what a cell phone is.
Yeah.
So because it happens there, what can happen in your biology is also a fractal. And remember, what is the brain? It's a quantum computer that
Mm-hmm.
can do amazing things that the computers that Silicon Valley make cannot do yet. So
Mm-hmm.
what are these people doing, these technocrats? They are using this as the model. They may not know earthly idea how it really works, but they know how to impact the system. That is really the story of Mo Dalitz and Meyer Lansky and MK Ultra. They were the ones that figured this out in casinos with light. We
Mm-hmm.
are now so far down the path, but no one sees Neuralink the way I do. It's Meyer Lansky 10.0. And if you continue to lie to yourself and think that this is not possible, then let me just tell you something. Some of the biggest atrocities, you think there was big atrocities in the 20th century? I think some of the atrocities that are coming to us in the 21st and 22nd century may make the 20th century look like child's play.
Mm, that's fair. Yeah, it's just really hard to see because, like you said, there's no target, so it's really hard to see where that goes. I mean, it's clear you can see how it could go very dystopian. Is there a utopian side to where this could go?
Yeah, I think the utopian side is what I just told you. Cochlear implants, actually giving sighted people the ability to see, synthetic retinas, all that's realistic. I see that. Can we fix people that have, broken immune systems? Do I even believe there may be an answer that's outside the Amazon basin where the technocrats may be able to fix the problem they created with their bioweapon? The answer is yeah, I can see that too. I see a lot of possibilities now, but here's the number one thing that I do see. When you give a group of people monopoly level power, they are not going to give it back unless there's bloodshed and we limit them. So
Hmm.
I believe that we need constitutional level change. Do I believe the people that just won this election are going to do that? No, they don't. Do I believe little countries like Suriname have that opportunity to realize the magnitude of the problem and put something better to make a union that's important? At one time, I thought the same thing was true about El Salvador. But, we have a president in El Salvador that truly does believe that. The problem is the people that are in Congress in his country, they don't want any of their power taken away.
Hmm.
Let me just tell you something. Samuel Coleman said something very interesting in this talk about corruption. He said, ultimately, you are relying on politicians, future politicians, to take power away from them and return it to the people in order to get the changes we need. Do a hard stop for a minute, Alexis, and think about that. What fucking politician do you know recently that's ever limited their strength to give it to the people? The only guy that I know is Bukele when he
Hmm.
made Bitcoin legal tender. Um, when you give people freedom and money, it's a huge statement. Now, what could Trump do to alleviate some of my fears about what I'm bringing to you in this podcast? I'll tell you, I don't think he'll make it legal tender because that will be a huge affront to the system that's built in the United States. But there is something he could do. He could turn around and say, well, we're not going to make it legal tender. We're going to back our reserve asset with Bitcoin. He goes, but we're going to make it tax free. If you
Hmm.
made it tax free, guess what? Then you're basically telling the savages out there exactly how the game is played. Is he doing some of that, like pulling us out of the World Trade Organization today? That's a move. Going to tariffs, eliminating taxes, going out to the IRS. These are all good things Trump's doing. But do I need to see other moves to see that Trump is truly a decentralized savage? When he goes and makes his own shitcoin or the
Yeah.
Milano coin or this and that, that is very similar to the moves that I told you that I saw in Suriname, with somebody who's, oh, I'm decentralized on X, but I'm fucking centralized as fuck on Facebook. No, that doesn't fucking work for Uncle Jack.
Hmm.
Okay. And do I have a duty when I do podcasts or I talk to people like you for you to understand it? Some people who don't understand this, Alexis, will listen to some of my discussions out of context. We're not listening to this podcast carefully and say, well, Jack's just a douchebag. Well, I'm okay, with people saying that. But remember, my tribe is small, 70 to 100,000 of people that truly are decentralized. And they understand why I'm saying what I'm saying and the purpose. It's because when you stay fully decentralized, you eliminate the dystopian ideas. That's what extinction events are in evolution. If you want to know what nature really does, when she creates a dystopian nightmare, she gets rid of it.
Makes a ton of sense. I heard something related on the Bitcoin front. I heard something about MicroStrategy. Actually, I don't know, maybe it was from you, but something about Bitcoin banking. You want to say a little bit about that?
Uh, yeah, you have to realize that again, Michael Sarah's a little bit like Elon Musk. He's looked at as, the new Bitcoin Jesus from Roger Ver.
Yeah.
But to me, he's also a little bit compromised. Why? He's got 500,000 Bitcoin through his corporation. He's not really a fan of making it legal tender. He'd rather put it in a banking thing so that he can leverage it and do different things with it. That means that he's okay with somebody else cussing his Bitcoin so that he can use it for other endeavors. If you truly understand what Len Sassaman, Satoshi Nakamoto, David Shum, all the cypherpunks really said, self-custody is one of the key constitutional beliefs that every Bitcoiner needs to have. And when you understand that the idea buried in Saylor's idea about store of value is the one that he champions, he's basically telling you store. I mean, self custody is important, but it's not as important because I have so much Bitcoin.
Hmm.
I don't know if Uncle Jack can get behind that story. And I really think the people that get the banking story right about Bitcoin, who I put my chips behind, those are the Caitlin Longs of the world, who are coming up with Custodia Bank in Wyoming. If you look about how she's going about this, I think she's above Saylor in terms of really understanding how Bitcoin can fit in as this type of asset, say 20, 25 years from now. The problem is Caitlin Long's endeavors in Wyoming with Cynthia Lummis have been really undercut by Senator Warren, Sherrod Brown, Jamie Dimon, all the fucking criminals that you heard going after Kash Patel, Tulsi Gabbard, and Bobby. And these are the people that are screaming the loudest because they've had all their money taken away from the NGOs. So I've publicly said on many podcasts that I think Elizabeth Warren is one of the biggest criminals in Washington, D.C. And people argue with me, say, no, it's Mitch McConnell, it's Pelosi, it's Adam Schiff. I'm like, yeah, they're criminals too, but you have to realize the reason I put Sherrod Brown and Elizabeth Warren up there with Jamie Dimon is because these are the people that clearly have blocked decentralization.
Mm-hmm.
They've done it through Operation Choke Point 1.0 and 2.0. And the point that I would like to make to you is that is exactly the same thing that Gregory Rusland did to his people when he pulled me off the stage. That level of censorship of the truth has kept people in Massachusetts, kept people in Ohio, kept people in New England of thinking that, Jamie Dimon and the Rockefellers and Rothschilds are better bet than Bitcoin is. To me, that's fucking psychotic.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think it's something that everybody needs. I mean, just like with everything else that we talk about and that you talk about, that for the decentralized aspect of Bitcoin to really work, you need to do your own due diligence and learn and teach yourself about it and really understand it versus just mindlessly, trying to, buy some, not really know what you're doing.
Isn't that what I told you when you first said, Jack, I
It
don't really
is.
understand Bitcoin? I said, trust me, and I'll make you understand it. When you understand it, you'll begin to realize it's the biggest story in how we fix science.
Yeah. And I can completely see that now. And it's how we fix government too, and how you get corruption out of government. And the irony of that whole conference or, meeting that you were at that you got pulled off the stage from, that meeting was supposed to be about corruption in government, right?
Correct. And, nature is often ironic, but the key thing is I'm hoping the people that listen to the first 2 hours that you and I just talked, they begin to make their own diagnosis. Like I'll know that trip was worthwhile for me to go down there and share this. This is my morbidity or mortality conference of what really happened in Suriname. And many people will take different pieces and parts away from this, but this whole story, the totality, is the single most important thing for a decentralized savage to understand. And I want you to understand that while the world is turning towards us, we're not out of the woods. There's new enemies that are always in our midst. And sometimes those enemies were our frenemies in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of how I look at the technocrats right now. And you just need to be careful because realize that those people will control your world as a scientist. They're gonna continue to control Huberman's world. Huberman doesn't even really know that he's a fucking puppet on a string. And he's okay being a puppet on a string. It's the reason why you see me, call out people like Peter Attia. Same reason. He's also a puppet. But it's not important, Alexis, that I say this. It's important that you understand why I'm saying this so you get it. Remember, the single most important person in the world is you. If you are not good enough for yourself, who are you good for? That is truly the decentralized savage mindset. And when you understand why Uncle Jack is saying what he's saying, then you will understand why I go after people who are centralized and how they think like a fucking great white shark goes after a baby seal. I make no apologies, and I don't care what you think. Why? Because I've introduced this thinking, this mindset to everything in my life. And you may not understand why I'm saying it, why I do it, or why I choose to use the words or the techniques that I do to do it. But it's to wake up those of you who are sleeping. You may think you're decentralized, like that young 36-year-old politician in Suriname. But if you're not, I'm going to make sure that you got an injury. Not going to kill you, but you wake up. It's time for you to get the full message.
I mean, pain wakes people up. I'm just remembering back to the fateful day that I found you. Some random person on Instagram sent me the Rick Rubin podcast with Huberman, and like my entire world flipped upside down on that day. And ever since then, and it's like I can totally see now, through the Huberman and the Atias, because I mean, back then I was, listening to both of their podcasts, not as much Huberman, but definitely Atia, and I was like super into it. And then after falling down this rabbit hole, seeing that all of the evidence-based quote unquote recommendations they're making is based off of poorly conducted science that is done in completely, let's say, unnatural environments with fallacious results. It's like, how can we base recommendations on these things? Why are we not asking better questions? Why aren't we doing better science? And then you have to start questioning everything, because it's like then you have to follow the money and the politics, and it's like all of this is connected and you can't unsee it once you see it.
Right. And that's the reason why when you sit down and say, this really all began with polio, General Groves, the Manhattan Project, Bernice Eddy, Oshner, Oliver Stone, JFK, Israel, USS Liberty, 9/11, David Ben-Gurion, LBJ, Nixon, Eisenhower's speech. You can't imagine how many parts of this story are tied together by this story of decentralization and centralization. It's astounding when you sit down. And the people that are willing to sit down and have these kind of discussions that we're having now, that's my tribe. The people that think, Abel James said this to me yesterday when he was here. He goes, I am absolutely stunned how podcasts have gone from 20, 30-minute things or like TikTok videos. He goes, and he said this to me, he goes, Jack, he goes, I think you've been the person that's changed the whole podcast world, because you do 3, 4, 5-hour podcasts with people now, and they actually are fucking sitting down and paying attention.
Yeah.
And I told him, so the reason why is because media has gone the opposite way, where they use little sound bites to try to teach you the truth. And the idiots that are low dopamine, they're going to stay on TikTok and Instagram. But the real decentralized savages, no, they're going to sit down and listen to a podcast for 2, 3, 4 hours, because they're being told the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And people value the truth. And once you get the reputation of telling people the truth, you may not have everything right, but they know that you're going to go to the nth degree to find the truth. Those are the conversations that you want to have with people. That's when Robert Breedlove will fucking come to El Salvador and sit where I'm sitting right now with his team and spend 4 days to ask me questions, or, and he finds some value in that. I don't think that world existed 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like definitely there's been shifts, and people are hungry for truth in a mainstream media that is completely devoid of it. I mean, one question that I actually have, that I don't know if you've addressed it before, but back in the Founding Fathers' time, when Rush suggested that we should add in a clause about medical tyranny, and he was cock-blocked, do you think that was in good faith? Or do you think that the conspiracy could go back that far?
15, 20% leads me to believe that it could go back that far. The
Wow.
reason why, the Fabian movement really gets its beginnings around 1830, 1837. This is when Queen Victoria comes in. But if you truly understand what Queen Victoria's mindset was about the United States, which she got, from the monarchs before it, this goes all the way back to King George. King George There has never been a greater upset in history than Britain losing America. And you have to realize, if you know anything about imperialism and colonialism, I try to explain a little to you about what happened with the Dutch and Suriname. You have the most decentralized group of people. All they cared about was God and tax on their tea, and they shot at the king. I mean, that's
Yep.
the message that I brought to Suriname. And when you think about what they're doing to us now, injecting us with bioweapons and fucking, geoengineering fucking mosquitoes in Medellin, Colombia to fucking ruin where the answers are in jungles all over the world. I mean, fuck, we should be shooting at them fucking right now.
Yep.
And we're not. And nobody's fucking mad. I just look at it like this. That was the biggest upset in history. And you think about how long, like, the Brits have controlled India. The colonial mindset is horrible. Like, you think about what Columbus really did. It is, I would say, MK Ultra negative 2.0. And I still think it's operational today. And I really learned that lesson in Suriname. I could not believe the real reason Gregory Ruslan is a corrupt motherfucker actually goes back to him being a slave.
Mm.
I actually thought about Stockholm syndrome after he pulled me off the stage. I've gone through a lot of reflection in the last 3 or 4 days about what just happened to me and really what it means to me. And I've been very measured in my words about what I've said to you, but I will tell you that I think this is still operational today in our country, Alexis. I think
Wow.
what you experience in New Jersey and New York is very different than what I experience in Louisiana and Florida for the same, like, how colonialism has affected. I actually think about African Americans in the United States now. Colonialism is actually the basis of the problems with race relations.
I could
And
totally
I
see
don't
that.
think people really understand that mindset until I know I didn't until I went through what I just did in Suriname. And to see this diversity of immigrants, I'm talking about Africans, Caribbeans, Japanese, Chinese, Indians. These are the immigrants there. Let me tell you something. They get along way better there than they do in the United States. And I can tell you, it has a lot to do with the colonialism that they went through. So what am I saying to you? The colonialism that's in different states in the United States is radically different, and we still don't understand how those things affect us. It's almost like the butterfly effect, where these small stimulus lead to massive problems. And I think it's the reason why Californians put up with people like Newsom. And I think it's the reason why Raphael Warnock got in power in Georgia. Unfortunately, Nicole helped him.
Yeah, I heard.
But, the thing is, in other words, it makes me a better diagnostician to understand the real behavioral and political forces that are going on in my own country. And I think I can understand things better from that standpoint. It doesn't mean that I really want to be political, because the truth be told, something I haven't told you to this point, when I was asked to go speak to NPS, I didn't want to do it. I told the people around me that I was not interested. And part of the reason I wasn't interested, because I think what I just told you, I knew was going to come out in between my words. I knew that something was going to happen that was an unintended consequence, not because of how I said it, but because of how it was received, because the message was being delivered to a colonial mindset.
Right. That makes sense. And who asked you actually to give the talk? Was it Rusland?
Well, I'm going to tell you, that's also a complicated question. I would say I was initially asked by the person who invited me to Suriname,
Okay.
who was trying to gain control of NPS. Then I was asked by the person that was going to give that person $500,000 to win that election. And then Chantel. Chantel was the third person. She goes, Jack, I think that's really why you came here. I think you should participate. You've spent 10 days here imbibing everything. I did it. And, the one thing that made me feel good about when this all went down that night, Chantel said to me, she goes, Jack, she goes, what you said there may be some of the most powerful stuff that I've ever heard you say in 15 minutes. And, the funny thing is when you give a talk like that, you are coming from your inside out. This was a lot to deliver to people, but I didn't know, like when you have a conversation with somebody, you don't know what somebody's receiving on the other end.
Yeah.
And for her to say that to me, and she's heard a lot of things that I've said, to say that that was really impactful, I thought that was kind of interesting because I was specifically talking about the corruption in my own country, not the corruption in their country. But what did they hear? They heard that you're basically telling the world that we're as corrupt as fuck. I would just say I found that part very interesting. And like I said, I don't know where the fallout goes. It'll be interesting because you're probably the only person I could have this discussion with right now because it's very complicated. And I know there's a lot of Bitcoiners out there that want to know what happened down here, why, I've put out the tweets that I've put out, why I've said the things that I've said. And I think after, them hearing this 2 hours and them seeing actually why I was pulled off the stage and hearing the context, I'm okay with people making their own diagnosis now. Why? Because I think you have the full story now. And I think the full story is important for people to hear because I think that story, it actually should resonate in Switzerland. It should resonate in the United States. It should resonate in all the states. It also should be a warning shot to the technocrats. The decentralized savages, we're happy with what you've done, but we don't fucking trust you one bit.
Trust needs to be earned. And it's never actually fully earned because you could change on a dime. Also ironic that after giving the talk that you were unceremoniously removed from the stage for, you were accused of hijacking the conference, even though you were invited.
You understand why, though? That is the colonial mindset of the person that asked me to speak.
Yeah.
In other words, you have to blame the captor. In other words, you cannot and do not think in a decentralized fashion. You didn't even realize that you had a huge opportunity to fucking take control of that political party right there in that moment, and you shit the bed. Is that message for that person right now in this podcast? Abso-fucking-lutely. You are not fit to lead right now until you get that message.
Yeah. And is it really hijacking if the plane's about to crash and you're hijacking it to like steer it, away from its demise? I feel like actually that could be perceived as a compliment because it's like what you said was so pertinent and on the nose that it stole basically the show from everybody else.
Well, I think so, but I think the thing that resonated for me is the story I tried to tell you about Savvy.
Yeah.
Here's a 19-year-old kid that doesn't know anything, and he got
Exactly.
the message clear. But here, somebody who trained at MIT who's supposed to have a big education completely fucking missed a lesson. So how decentralized can you really be when a kid who has none of the power you do in your own place got the message loud and clear? That's a fucking embarrassment if you want to know the truth. And you want to know, that's what I'm fucking mad at. And I know a lot of the Bitcoiners, like the Samson Maos of the world, the people that have sat down with this person, I want them to know, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Doesn't mean she's a bad person. Just fucking know who you're dealing with.
Exactly. Well,
That's
I
why
think
she backed out with you. It's
yeah.
the same story. You know it. And the nice thing about this podcast with me and you, I have shared all this with you before we got on. I let you see, you tried to reach out to that person. You had the podcast schedule with that person. You were giving them the chance to get in front of this, right?
Yep.
And when that chance was not taken, who stepped up? The decentralized savage.
That's right.
I'm here telling you exactly what happened.
Yeah. And I think, honestly, it seems like things happened the way they were supposed to. I feel like, I mean, you may have changed the trajectory of that country. I guess we'll see how things play out over the next decade or so. But I'm sure, outside of Savi, I think you said his name was, I'm sure other people also got the message as well. And that's, worth its weight.
There's a whole bunch of ladies that came up to me after the talk when they saw I was unceremoniously pulled, and they all said with a big smile on their face, "We really hope you come back to Suriname. We loved what you said, and we wish you could have finished."
Wow.
It made me feel really good.
That's great. That's worth it. It makes it worth it for sure. Well, I think we've gone a long time. Is there anything else you want to share before we wrap up?
Well, I have to go because I'm getting taken out on a date right now for Valentine's Day.
Oh, well,
Somebody sitting
enjoy.
next to me in a red dress, all dressed up, and you see I have no shirt on and a Suriname hat, so I guess I got to go. She's kind of that subtle message that shut up.
Are you gonna get foie gras?
I don't know. I
Okay.
don't know. It's supposed to be a surprise, so we'll see. I
Oh,
know
happy
that I didn't get
Valentine's
flowers this morning, and I'm still mad at that.
I did. I was very well treated this
Any
morning.
flowers?
Well, happy Valentine's Day, you guys. This was
All
really
right.
fun. We'll talk soon.
All right. Take care.
Take care. Bye.